What's up, everyone? I have no idea who's going to want to join me today on this Sunday noon here, but hey, I see some of you coming in. That's awesome. We can obviously discuss whatever you want to discuss about yesterday, and of course, big fantasy football weekend for many. I'm in the semifinals in one league. I'm going to ask for some advice here in a bit, but of course, thanks to everybody for being here. I just went out, got my coffee. Um, So yes, I'll give a second here for everybody else to jump to jump in here. How for those of you who are already here, how we feeling today? The good thing about it, Washington not playing on Sunday is you get to watch the Sunday game. So Scott Hansen will be in my living room for much of the day, I presume. Let's look forward to that. How again, see some of you guys are in here. How everybody doing? Don't be shy. Oh my God, Fred's here. Awesome. Steve, Jim, Mark, Paul, Jeff, you guys all rock. I appreciate you all being here. Um, it's just gonna be me, so I'm just gonna, like I said, I'm gonna give it a second here to before I start spewing. Steve, all good. I'm glad to hear it. Glad to hear it. Um, I mean, it is time to like. I don't know how you guys are. For me, keeping up on all of the league is difficult during the season because on like even for like yesterday, for example, I didn't see the end of that crazy Bears Packers game because I was focused on whatever else I was doing from a work perspective. So I didn't get to see it. So like I don't always have a great. It takes till like a late, in this case with the team out of it to really start to pay a little bit more attention. And so I'm excited to see what games are on. I don't even know what games are actually on the local TV. Sometimes I do like just leaving it on, whichever game is on Fox or CBS or whatever, and watching the full game rather than the churn of the red zone, except when the red zone is helpful regarding my fantasy teams. That type of deal. All right, so obviously, again, if you guys you want to talk about fantasy or whatever's on the slate today or anything non-Commanders related, please ask away. In terms of the game yesterday, I mean, I think it's a couple things here. First off, you know, my stance going back pretty much, I think, since they lost to the Bears, going from that point forward, is that, or maybe after they got blown up by Dallas, is that if the other team shows up, and this is particularly true without Jaden Daniels, both all leaders, if the other team shows up and doesn't play with their food, they're going to win. Like, that's why I didn't get overly worked up that they had a really good half against the Chiefs in the first half because Kansas City was kind of, the other team has to be factored in too. Kansas City was, not playing great the second half. They took control, pulled away. Somewhat of the same thing here. Obviously, to go from Mariota to Josh Johnson is tough. We'll get to that in a minute. But, it was 10-7 at halftime. The Eagles were just kind of, as they have been this year, they've been pretty erratic, and they weren't exactly crushing it. But eventually, Saquon Barkley took over. He got the majority of his yards in the second half. He was credited, I think, with 6 broken tackles. I want to say 68 of his yards came on missed tackles, which he gets credit for too. But nonetheless, if you're a defender to get your hands on a guy, the hope is you got to bring him down or at least slow him down, and they weren't able to do that. The offense didn't do much even with Mariota in there, but certainly a lot less after Josh Johnson went into the game. And look, when you have all the injuries, we get it. Like, there's only so much they're going to be able to do. There was a stat from Next Gen Stats that Jalen Hurts was only pressured on 4 of his dropbacks, and it was the lowest percentage of pressure he had faced in his entire career. Yeah, no Dorrance Armstrong, of course. Dietrich Wise long gone. Um, I can't get overly worked up about the Javon Kinlaw ejection that came pretty late in the game. But and look, the Eagles are missing Lane Johnson. Their offensive line has been not nearly what it's been historically. So I know that Washington has played shorthanded, but the Eagles, have not looked super great against other teams, and you know, they were able to keep their quarterback very, very clean in the pocket. And a lot of these things are not going to get resolved until next season. So I think we all get that. And we can talk about the brouhaha at the end. I wrote about that. I My feelings are there. I guess I would just say, just sort of in broadly, I don't personally have an issue with what the Eagles did, and actually I'm gonna explain it here by talking about the quarterbacks that Washington currently has right now. We don't know if Marcus Mariota will be able to go this coming week. Dan Quinn will talk to us today at 3:30. I don't know if he'll update us specifically on Mariota, but with a short week, they are going to be back practicing tomorrow in order to get ready for Thursday's game. So we'll know by tomorrow if Mariota's on the injury report how we feel. In any event, if that's the way it goes down, if it's no Mariota, then it's Josh Johnson and Sam Hartman. And obviously that the game right now is not a huge deal for where Washington is at. But even beyond that, forget that. Let's just say Mariota were to play. Mariota is obviously a fine backup quarterback. I mean, I don't we have any qualms about that. I already wrote that they should resign him now, get that over with, and I still feel that way without question. But anybody who's listened to my Wizards content over the years knows that I can get really into the back end roster minutia, but it's not for I'm super bored, maybe. Uh, uh, but like it's because I find that the teams that continually play all four quarters, as it were, in every aspect of their organization are the teams that ultimately have the most success. Or just logically, that's the way that it should happen. You have to get lucky with injuries, and you got to pick the right players. But here's where I'm at with the quarterback and why I think on some odd level it ties into the Eagles' decision to go for the two. Okay, so Shane here says, "How in the world did we settle on Josh Johnson as QB3? Why would you not just roll with a young one?" It's a totally fair point, Shane. And look, for a team that is a contender, as Washington seemingly was going into the year, I understand if you think to yourself, you know what, we only have the 5 draft picks last year, so we're not going to use one on a quarterback. We have Sam Hartman in the building. I guess he could sort of still be a prospecty kind of a guy. So let's lock up the best quarterback we can that's willing to be the third guy. And Josh Johnson, who is the definition of a journeyman quarterback, fits into that, right? And then you also have Sam Hartman, an undrafted free agent from a year ago. Sam had some success in college. If you're a quarterback and you go undrafted, sure, there's the occasional random guy who comes out of nowhere to become uh, a viable player in the league, but typically that's not the way you go, especially at that position. So, okay, they had Hartman here last year. They decided based on what they saw that he was not going to be their third guy. In and of itself, that should tell you something about how they think of him. So here you are, and yeah, Steve mentions Jeff Driscoll, who was the third last year. They decided to move on from him. Now, I will note, as I have previously, that Adam Peters and Josh Johnson share the same agent. I don't know that there was any type of funny business going on there, but it is worth noting that of all the gin joints, that's where they landed on their backup quarterback. I do wonder on some level if Josh Johnson is here in part to help out or to maybe if David Blau were to move on, either get a better job or go with Cliff Kingsbury or whatever it might be, that maybe Johnson becomes the new David Blau. But that's just me speculating, and that's we'll see. Um, but here's my thing, right? So Mariota's a free agent. Even just forget this year. We already knew from last year, Jaden Daniels got hurt twice. He was able to start all the games, but 2 games he had to leave early. And we get it. He's gonna take his chances. That's that's a bigger conversation, right? But anyway, so you've got that, and Mariota's a free agent. Now, Mariota did sign, of course, as we know. Uh, If you go back and look at the timing last year, I don't know this for a fact, but well, I know this part for a fact that Mariota re-signed with Washington shortly after Daniel Jones signed with the Colts, which to me was the last job where a quote unquote backup would have an actual chance to play real games beyond injury because Anthony Richardson was up in the air, remained so. And Daniel Jones went there. There was the opening behind JJ McCarthy in Minnesota, but clearly they were going to go with McCarthy. So you're only getting to play there similar to here, if an injury or something. So Mariota decided, let's go. I'm going to go stay in Washington. Again, I don't know that he was considering the Colts, but I'm noting the timing. That means that if I'm right, that he could have this offseason, he could decide, hey, maybe I will move on. If Cliff Kingsbury decides to go to another team, maybe Mariota follows him if he really thinks the system has been a big benefit to him. If somebody offers him more money, we know Washington has a ton of cap space, but if they also have a ton of holes to fill. I mean, the backup quarterback is a very, very important position, so it should be prioritized. But who knows? Maybe there isn't. Who knows? It's not a lot that he's here. So the point would be at the sport's most important position, you should constantly, in my opinion, have more and more options as you can to develop, and so you're never caught shorthanded at that position. Now, um, I typically believe that you should draft a quarterback somewhere maybe on day 3 almost every year. Obviously, if you draft the guy 1 year in the 6th round and you think he's interesting, maybe there's no point in doing it again the next year, but, you get my general point. It should always be top of mind because, again, if Mariota leaves, then what? Well, now let's look at what their options are. You got 39-year-old Josh Johnson, who is not going to be a realistic number 2 quarterback. He actually was for the Ravens a year ago. Good for them. It should not be realistic for Washington or really any team going forward. Okay. You want him to be your 3rd guy? Fine, but not your number 2. And then you have Sam Hartman. Clearly, they've made the decision he's not a guy for them. I mean, I asked Dan Quinn this week, is there a world where Sam Hartman could actually play the rest of the year, right? And he said, that doesn't seem likely. Even Mariota's the guy. Now we'll see if that changes here. Should Mariota actually be out? But you get my general point. They didn't even bring Hartman up to be the 3rd quarterback yesterday as the emergency. They were so not concerned about him. And look, he's not looked the part. We've seen him in preseason. I watch him in practices during training camp. Seems like a really good dude. Clearly, he and Jaden get along well. Seems like the quarterback room is a lot of good vibes. And if he's part of that, you want to keep him, so be it. But to have both of these guys now as the backup quarterback, with neither one of them has a realistic chance to replace Mariota if it matters, that to me is a mistake. Again, I'm not saying Jeff Driscoll is all that. Jeff Driscoll is 32 now, so he's not a kid, and nobody else in the league picked up Jeff Driscoll until I think he's on the team now, but wasn't in camp. So again, I'm not saying he's the answer, but in 100 scenarios, there are some scenario where Jeff Driscoll could be the number 2, and you could be okay with that. There's almost no scenarios in which the Josh Johnson or Sam Hartman is. So to me, that is a sign of saying we're not playing all 4 quarters here, so to speak, in terms of working on the roster for this very specific position that is very, very important. We see at other positions, you can sign guys off the street; they can kind of jump in somewhat quickly. Quarterback, much more complicated. And not to mention, let's play this out. Let's just say Josh Johnson has gotten hurt. I don't believe that Sam Hartman would start and let's say the game mattered. I believe Washington would do what they kind of did back in 2020 when they went with Taylor Heineke over Steven Montez, who was the Sam Hartman equivalent. But remember, Ron Rivera said Montez's eyes got really big when the idea of him having to play in a game counted. So they went with Heineke, and obviously it's the greatest decision of all time. Um, that to me is what you do as a team. You constantly adjust and tinker and adjust. The Eagles, a great example of this. They had Kenny Pickett. They traded for him. They traded him to Cleveland, got Dorian Thompson from UCLA guy. That didn't work out. They moved on from him. They drafted Tanner McKee. He's the current number 2. They traded for Sam Howell. Sam Howell is now here. They are constantly adjusting, trying to figure out who do you have as depth at the most important position. That to me makes a lot of sense. Sam Howell, as we saw that show here, so none of us would be terribly excited if he was the 3rd guy. But the fact that he's been traded for 3 times, to Seattle from here, to Minnesota, to Philly, says that he's the kind of quarterback that the other teams are willing to have on their roster. And I'm not saying they were trading, 2nd-round picks for him, but they're willing to do something to have a young quarterback with arm talent and aggressive mindset on their roster. That to me makes a lot of sense. It doesn't make sense over here. And it goes to, um, oh, I guess that's what I'm saying. Yeah. So like if it ever came down to it, they wouldn't even use Hartman, I don't believe. I actually was asking this yesterday. If Josh Johnson got knocked out, let's just say, and Sam Hartman was the only quarterback, would David Blau, who retired for last year and is on the staff tours, would he play over Sam Hartman? And I kind of think the answer would be yes if the game mattered. But this ties into me to the end of the game with the going for the 2-point conversion by the Eagles. And you can feel how you want about it. If you feel that like the Eagles are rubbing it in, okay. I mean, to me, there's no moral victories in pro sports, and there are certain rules that we apply to the younger levels of the sport, the pee wee, the football, maybe even high school, maybe even some aspects of college, where you say, hey, at some point, just call off the dogs, as they say, you know, run out the clock, don't do anything, don't do anything crazy, whatever. I don't buy that for the pros at all. Unless the other team says we're not going to try anymore, you keep trying, right? Did Washington say, okay, look, hey, Sirianni, don't don't do this, and we'll just kneel when we get the ball back, and we'll punt it back. We'll just end the game. Obviously, they're not going to do that. So Sirianni, if you look, what he said is they looked at the math and they decided they would rather be up 19 than 18, and it is 100% logical to say that, right? Because let's just look at the math here. Forget the time and the opponent for the moment, but you look at the math. If they kick the extra point, they go up 18, meaning Washington would need 2 touchdowns, 2 extra points, and a field goal in order for Philly to lose. The key being, though, that if that all were to happen, highly unlikely, but weird things happen in sport. We all have seen it. Then Philly would lose. Instead, they said, no, 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 let's do this. Let's take away that variable if we can. So they go for 2, and they get it to go up 19. Now, if all that plays out, field goal in the end or whatever, they would tie and keep playing. That to me is not stupid. That is playing it all the way through to the end, just like I'm talking about with the quarterbacks. And it works because even if they miss the 2-point conversion at 17, it's still 3 scores. So Washington would still have to get uh we wouldn't need the 2 points anymore. We have to get 2 touchdowns and a field goal. That is a reasonable choice to make. If Washington had made the same choice in reverse, I wouldn't be going, well, that's just dumb. I wouldn't be going there rubbing it in. I would say, yeah, play it all out the whole time. So to me, that's why I equate the choices here at quarterback and the choice by the Eagles to go for 2 in a similar vein. You play it out at all times or you don't. To take another example, let's look at the practice squad. Again, I'm not going to go overly crazy about this. Like practice squad is primarily there for pure depth. In some cases, which means like older vets. Here they've had all these receivers are older guys. You've got Dieter out on the offensive line. Chase Edmonds was a running back for some time. Those types of things. But it's also there to develop younger guys. Guys to you know give them the opportunity to practice, to be with the staff, to be part of the system, to learn what's going on, and then maybe they become something, maybe they don't. Again, it's a rare circumstance that somebody goes from practice squad to being a legit starter, but it does happen. And even if it's not like a starter, you need backups too. We know the depth has been problematic. So, um, I bring this up because I understand for the first half of the year in particular, certainly like through like say week 10, they were just trying to keep the front office is just trying to keep their heads above water. The whole roster is decimated with injuries, right? Receiver room was a complete mess. So I understand why they maybe at that point go out for a Robbie Chosen or a River Craycraft to be there just in case, as opposed to poaching a 23-year-old prospect, whatever that might mean, off of um, another team's roster, right? So, but at some point, when the season is getting away from you, it seems to me that I would look around the league and I would see what players are on practice squads, and I would make a determination: are there any guys that we see who we think could be possible anything? backup, starter, training camp depth, whatever it might be for next year, because next year is what matters now. And unless I'm forgetting something, they have not taken anybody off of anybody else's practice squad. They also, when they brought Chris Moore back, which he ended up having to play a decent amount yesterday, I guess in part because of Jalen Lane getting hurt. But so you had Chris Moore, you had Robbie Chosen, they bring in River Craycraft when Chris Moore goes up, and they have Jacoby Jones. Ja'Cory Brooks has been hurt, so we'll put him on the side. But they do have two younger guys there. So of their options, they have four receivers. Three of them are over 30, and they chose to bring up the guy who we've already seen be a non-factor at receiver, who is unlikely to be part of this roster next year. Anything's possible, but I doubt it. I mean, if Chris Moore is back for training camp as depth because he knows the system and you like the guy, okay. But he should not be in any real plan to be on the roster. I don't know what Jacoby Jones is. He caught a pass in the one game he played that was a third down play called to throw to him. He caught it for a 20+ yard gain, and yet has not been up since. Wouldn't it be logical, it seems like to me, to add him to the 53, let him play it out rather than Chris Moore? That is how I would see it. But again, but it's not just that. It's also just the idea of, well, why aren't you? Are you telling me that there's nobody else on any of these rosters that's worth even considering? A year ago at this time, Mitchell Tinsley and Bryson Tremaine were on this practice squad. Now, we saw what Tinsley did in the preseason against Washington, unbelievable catches. And then he's had 2 touchdowns in the regular season. He's only had 8 catches. Again, I'm not going crazy about that this guy that they let some all-pro will leave the building. But I am saying that he's very athletic, that he plays behind Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, so that kind of blocks things automatically. And he's had some plays. Bryson Tremaine, I think he has 12 catches for Carolina. Not crazy, but that's more than Chris Moore, and he's a younger guy. I would always rather take a shot on upside because you never know versus a guy who's been in the league, you know what they are, and it's not going anywhere unless what you need is a veteran presence, because sometimes you do. Sometimes it's not wise to go with the young kid who's super raw, might be athletic, but doesn't know where they're going. So to me, all of these things sort of factor in together, and none of this has anything to do with why Washington is 4-11. I mean, let's be clear about that. Injuries exposed the lack of depth, and not fun times ensued. But this is why I'm not getting upset about the 2-point conversion. I don't have any issue with what Philly did. I take a little bit of it, we don't always know exactly what's going on with the fighting situation there. I don't know who said what to whom and all these kinds of things. So uh, it's too bad for all involved that became that happened. Then that became a topic. I thought for the most part the players handled it fine post game. Both Terry McLaurin and Bobby Wagner were like, "Hey, I don't really have an issue. We got to stop them." But as Wagner said, similar to Dan Quinn, well, we'll see. We'll see them in 2 weeks. In other words, this is probably not over yet in their minds. Do what you got to do. It's the manly sport. I'm not out there. If you feel disrespected, who am I to tell you that you're wrong? But I, again, don't have an issue with what the Eagles, uh, with what the Eagles did. I was a little bit surprised that Dan Quinn seemed to be a bit uh, seething a little bit about it. And there was the quick handshake, some late timeouts going on. I don't know. It seemed like he was a little caught up in that. And again, to me, I'm just like, well, Dan Quinn, you chose to kick a field goal on the first possession from the 2-yard line on 4th down against a team that you're definitely an underdog against. And I know that Philly is their defense their offense has been erratic, but your own defense is not good. So the idea that you're going to kick a field goal when the other team is going to eventually score points, that didn't make any sense to me. He punts twice in the 4th quarter on 4th downs near midfield, 4th and 4, 4th and 6. Again, do I think they were going to come back and win with Josh Johnson? No. But if you're going to punt the ball, not go for it, don't yell at the other team if they're being aggressive. I don't see the harm there. Again, I'm not saying Dan Quinn was yelling, but he seemed to be a bit miffed that they did go for that too. So that's how I tie all these things together. I know none of that has anything to do with 4-11 for the most part, but a little bit because I do think there's a little bit of a mindset here. All right, you guys are rocking. You guys been asking me questions or making comments while I'm talking here. Um, Steve, always a tough bet if this team goes through more kickers or quarterbacks in the season. Yeah, I mean, look, obviously that is a whole story, a whole saga in of itself. Shane, do you feel Kingsbury will move on? It seems to be mentioned a lot, but stats aren't bad on offense. It just seems strange that it's being mentioned. Is there more behind the scenes? So I don't know where Kingsbury's at. Part of it is, he was obviously a guy that was in the mix last year, but he chose to stick it out here. They were still in the playoffs. Also, he was still getting paid by the Cardinals, which that deal ends now or after this offseason. And the reason why it's being mentioned a lot is it possible that he's still a guy that's a hot option for another team? He's known that to work with quarterbacks. If you're a team like, say you're the Giants, I don't know that I'm not suggesting that this is like an actual thing, but if you're the Giants and you look at what the offense of Washington runs with Jaden Daniels, is that something that maybe would make sense for a mobile guy in Jackson Dart? Um, Perhaps. So that's why it's being mentioned. Now, that said, I do think there are questions about the hurry up offense, the no huddle offense. This is the only team that runs some version of this, essentially a 2-minute offense all the time. Washington or teams under Cliff Kingsbury constantly run more hurry up than anybody else in the league. And obviously, a lot of things worked last year. It less so this year. I do wonder how taxing it is on some of the bigger bodies out there. And, we've talked, there's been this notion of the cliff in the past. I thought it was misguided when discussing it last year. But in terms of the in-season adjustments, if you go back and look at his time in college, there were a lot of variables that led to, I think, some of that cliff stuff, including the fact that at Texas Tech, I know they're like a top 4 seed in the college football playoffs this year. But historically, Texas Tech is lacking talent to the Oklahomas and Texases and whomever in a sport where the disparity can be off the charts. In the NFL, in theory, until things are going to be much closer because of the draft and free agency and things like salary cap and things like that. So that's why it gets mentioned. I think it's an interesting conversation. Would this group be better off? Would Jaden Daniels be better off if they went for more of a pro style system? We can talk more about that in the offseason. Steve, spot on, Ben, not putting words in your mouth, but the in-season recruitment seems lazy. Again, I don't always like to, I always like to try to be like, hey, this is just how I look at it. They may look at it very differently. Maybe they tried to get some people, and for whatever the reason, it just didn't happen. Somebody they tried to get, maybe the other team, because the other team can bring that player up to the main squad. Maybe they tried to do that. Um, like I said, there's a difference between the coach and the GM. The coach is for the moment. The GM is for the bigger picture. And while Dan Quinn, I guess, gets to make decisions on who plays and who doesn't, I would like to think that Adam Peters could say, "Hey, why isn't Jacoby Jones up over Chris Moore?" You know, Chase Edmonds is a fine bet. Do we think he could be the Austin Eckler replacement next year? I mean, I doubt it. He's not even playing ahead of Jeremy McNichols now. So why is he on the roster over, say, a Donovan Edwards, who was a good college player, had a good preseason with the Jets? He's now here. He's also a rookie, so I don't know what he is. Maybe he stinks. Maybe he doesn't. But why isn't he on the thing? That's where the GM to me seems to be get more involved because the coach's job is to focus on the win, which is why when I asked Dan Quinn yesterday after the game, have you given any consideration to possibly sitting some guys? Because I haven't discussed the injuries yet. So not only is there no Jaden and no Tunsil in the game, during the game, Sam Cosmi and Johnny Newton get checked out for concussions. Mariota gets checked out for concussion. He's good there, but then he hurts his hand. Brandon Coleman has a shin injury. He was in there for Tunsil. And Jalen Lane went out in the first quarter with an ankle injury when he got hit on a punt. Injuries happen. I totally get it. But when you're in this game and it's late and you're losing, why are some guys still in there? Why is Sam Cosmi in the game? I didn't look to notice to see if Terry McLaurin was still out there, but like why? You know what I mean? Like, why would anybody who would be part of your poor going forward, still be in this game? I don't know. I don't It doesn't make sense to me unless you're just so focused on we have the next play, the next play, the next play. You know, you tell these guys to run through a brick wall all the time. I can't pull off the gas, which is also why I pointed out and I asked Dan Quinn after the Vikings game, "Hey, it was only the third quarter. Why didn't you bring him back in?" And he said that he felt the game was, getting away from them. Okay, but it was only the third quarter. So if you're going to say the game was getting you away from you there, and therefore we're not going to play Jaden, who of course all the injuries, we all get that. But shouldn't the same logic apply to some of your other players who are out there who, you don't want to see get hurt? And to me, that would make sense. So it's just a lack of consistency there as well. Any early thoughts on Drake Jackson? Is a question here from AP. Like that he got some snaps, but I didn't really notice him. I did notice him on a couple of plays um, in the pass rush, but yeah, I need to see more. It was good that he was able to get out there and play a fair amount. I think it was like 31% of the snaps for his first game back since a 2023 knee injury that was pretty uh, devastating. He's a quick guy, of course. It was a second round pick in 2022 by the Niners with Adam Peters in that front office at the time. And to me, this is a good example of taking a shot on depth. Now, of course, they're doing it with a guy that Peters knows. And to be clear, they did the same thing with Traylon Burks. It just, didn't go straight go to the practice squad. But those guys were like 2 high draft picks, so like it's not hard to sort of identify them as guys who you might want to take a shot on. I'm saying, from the scouting perspective, where's the rando who's on that we've never heard of, who's on Cleveland practice squad or whatever? That's a different category to me. But they need defensive line depth. So if Drake Jackson can show anything here down the stretch, I think that's a good sign. Again, whether he's a starter or the fifth defensive end, it all helps. He's still a young guy, so I think to me that's a good deal. Let me see here, Steve. In the Premier League, oftentimes you're described as being on the beach when teams just go through the motions in late season games. For the Commanders, it seems like the coaching staff and front office are on the beach. Um, like I said, I think that's they're trying their best. I just think that maybe they just have a different view of it than say I would, than say maybe, and I don't want to compare myself to Howie Roseman, but again, I think the Eagles are constantly looking to turn the roster, trying to make even if it's an incremental upgrade, that enough incremental upgrades over time could lead to something, actually positive. So I would, continue to try uh, to do that. But when you're, when the season's gone away and you're, feeling some pressure in some way, shape, or form, you know, I get that you might be focusing too hyper focused on the moment and not enough on the bigger picture. All right, you guys rock. Before we get out of here, you got any more questions? Fire away. I do have one for the group here though. Fantasy football question. Semifinal, so it's a big deal. Justin Herbert's my quarterback. Um, he's got a good enough matchup against Dallas, but he's still dealing with the hand. He gets hurt all the time. It looks like Quentin Johnston's playing, but I don't know. You've got I've got CJ Stroud against the Raiders. Clearly a nice matchup. The problem there is just that Houston's offense has not been always fantasy friendly this year and better lately. And what if they get off to a big lead and CJ Stroud doesn't do much the last quarter and a half? That's not potentially not great. It could be good if he's already crushed it. Then my third option is Jacoby Brissett, who has been throwing the ball a ton over the last month or so. He's been putting up good fantasy numbers. They get Marvin Harrison back, which I don't necessarily love because I also have Michael Wilson. He's been amazing without Harrison. So I'm probably going to have to bench him perhaps this week for Ted McMillan. But anyway, those 3 quarterbacks, Herbert all day, says Steve. I mean, that's certainly the safer call that, like, if things go wrong the next time, I'm not going to be like, oh, I put Herbert in. That was terrible. I have Brissett in there right now. Brissett has been absolutely crushing it. The matchup isn't as good on the surface as the other 2 games, but that also could mean that the Cardinals are constantly throwing in the second half. Shane, I'm starting Stroud, had Caleb on the bench. Well, I mean, unless your league gets points for clutch moments, I don't know, you're probably okay, right? I mean, I didn't look at Caleb's final numbers, but just based on the final score, it wasn't like some high scoring, prolific game. But we'll see. Stroud has definitely got the better matchup. There's no doubt about that. Does anybody else have any lineups decisions to make here with 23 minutes to go? Actually, really 18 minutes to go, right? Because they lock us out 5 minutes before kickoff. Um, Beyond that, I mean, really, obviously, I haven't talked much about the game itself. Obviously, again, once Mariota went out, it's only so much the offense could do realistically. I totally get that. Uh, so, you know, again, once he goes out, I'm not holding them for losing. Let's be clear um, about that. I mentioned Treylon Burks. He had another, impressive catch out there. I, I'm curious to know, and I don't know if we'll get the straight answer, but it seems pretty clear he can make the spectacular, but can he make the steady? Can he be a reliable play-to-play guy? He played a ton of snaps yesterday. He played as many as Terry McLaurin did in the game, which is good. That's what you want to see. He should play. See what he can do. Give it a look. If he's able to show them enough that maybe he is the wild card next year, maybe he can be the number two guy, or the second outside receiver opposite Terry. That'd be huge. I don't know where they're at though. He might be, to me right now, more of a upsidey fourth receiver with somebody in the slot and somebody else on the outside and somebody you can maybe throw the jump ball to, things like that. But we'll see about that. Um, Chris Fowler, then what do you see is the plan to compete with the Eagles? Like, what is the approach that the team is taking? And if you ask leadership directly, I mean, obviously they are trying to compete with the Eagles. You don't go out and make moves for Laramie Tunsil and Deebo Samuel and Javon Kinlaw if you're not trying to compete. Obviously, injuries screwed up everything, right? Both in terms of the volume, but also certain aspects of players like the Dietrich Wise injury. Again, he's not man or manly. I get that, but they brought him in specifically to add bigger bodies on the lines, particularly on the edge, to make it harder for teams to run outside on them, i.e., the Eagles, who did that constantly last year. Well, he gets hurt in week 2, and that plan went away because they didn't have anybody else behind him. Whatever list of issues that they have that we're going to discuss all offseason, they will not fill them all. Just warning you up front. No team does unless your list is like 3 positions long. They have so many issues. It's not just the starters, it's also the depth. So they'll have whatever draft picks they end up with. They've got this free agency. They've got all this cap space, but of course, they have a lot of guys to sign. I know some of you out there say Bobby Wagner's got to go. Cool, but then you got to replace Bobby Wagner. You want to say it's Jordan McGee? I don't know. Same thing at tight end. I see there was a Ben Sinnott comment in here. I haven't watched the tape back yet. I know last week I thought Sinnott actually had some pretty good game, even though the ball didn't go to him. Same thing here. I don't know exactly what quite happened here, but we'll see. I'll look at the film and see if Ben Sinnott was there. But they got to throw it to him too. Like Ben Sinnott prior to yesterday had 10 targets in his career, 10 catches. He did get one target yesterday that wasn't really to him, was thrown away, but it was in his general direction. So when the ball goes to him, he's been catching it. It's just not going to him a lot. And so the question is, why is that? I think I talked before. I don't think he's a really good fit for what the Kingsbury offense is, which is a whole other conversation of why then did you pick him? Because I think Peters liked him, but that's neither here nor there. So, I mean, I think it's not like I don't think their overall approach has been bad. They've been building up on the lines. That's where their focus has been. I'm all in on that, finding ways to help Jaden Daniels. But most of what we've talked about here today has been on the stuff on the periphery that I think signals not only is it good to potentially help the roster, even if it's incrementally, but it also signals a bit of the mentality that we're going to go look at every scenario at all times. I'm sure somebody in the building would say to me, "Hey, Ben, get over yourself. Of course, we check out everything at all times. Cool, but like where's the action? That's kind of where I was kind of getting to it before. Um, yeah, the bubble wrap for these players. I mean, it is insane just how often they are getting hurt. Sam Cosmi, we'll find out today or maybe today or this week, his deal, he looked very not wobbly as if like he was like couldn't walk, but he was, I don't know, he seemed to be having trouble focusing with his eyes a little bit. He said he was okay. He didn't talk to us on the record, but just casually, he said he was okay. I don't know. Hopefully he's fine. I mean, obviously concussions are scary. You don't want to see anybody get hurt. So hopefully he's fine. Again, he would be somebody that if he said to me, we're not going to play him the rest of the year, I'm good with that. I mean, as long as Jaden's not out there, what, what I would decide which some of these guys, and I would sit, especially with Kyle coming off an injury. He looks healthy. He looks fine, but I don't know why the point I'm risking it at this stage. It's not, I mean, toughness only goes so far. You need to be smart too. So, I wouldn't care if Tunsil played again this season. Now, if they wants to, maybe, you gotta with certain vets, maybe you have to say, hey, you're gonna play. Terry McLaurin would obviously be another guy that I would say, hey, bubble wrap. Even Deron Payne, because in part, if he were to get hurt, well, that could mess up things up with the contract situation since he's under contract for next year, making potentially a cap release a little tougher. Maybe not, but something that could potentially happen. So these are the things that I think about. I like diving into the minutia on all these matters. To me, these things are important on numerous levels. And again, it's a mindset it's insight into the mindset of the organization. I think clearly this group was very, very focused, as they should have been, on closing the gap with them and the Eagles, on giving Jane Daniels enough help so that if everything went their way, the breaks like they did last year, were in their favor, that they could take advantage of that and have a good run. By week 2, it already started to feel like that was not going to happen. Things kind of went sideways, but really at no point this year did it ever feel like it was going in a truly positive direction, except for maybe those last three quarters against the Chargers, and that quickly went away the next week when, who knows, this entire season may have been different if Jaden Daniels does not fumble the ball in the rain against the Bears. The Bears obviously have just gone on to have a monster season. They're currently the 2 seed in the NFC. So, yeah, I I'm not questioning at all that they were not trying to win, and it is hard, I imagine, to be so hyper focused on contending and competing and all these things, and then the season goes a different way, and to make the pivot to say the games we are playing now are not as important as what's to come, and it just does not feel to me like they've made that pivot enough, if at all, really. We'll see. There's 2 games to go. Maybe something changes, but even if like signing guys off of somebody else's practice squad feels like it's a little bit late now. What are 2 games going to do? And the fact that if it's on offense, it is a Josh Johnson, Sam Hartman show down the stretch. I don't know what that's doing for anybody. We'll see. Maybe Mariota plays. I think for them to be able to just function as a group, that would be huge. We'll find out. Again, Dan Quinn talks today at 3:30 amid all this football games. Come on, Dan Quinn, what are we doing? 3:30 is the usual time on Mondays, but with a short week, everything's getting pushed up. So that's how that's going to go today. So I will report back on that as well. Love it. You guys were great. Thanks so much for being here, for being part of the Last Man Standing community, hanging in there with me as this season has gone off the rails. But as we know, the off season is always very interesting, and this one should be plenty fun. Half the roster is going to have to be replaced or overhauled. New defensive coordinator at a minimum. What are they doing in the draft? Are they going to trade down? What are they going to do? So there's a lot here to get into, and I'm excited to get into it with you guys. Yeah, lots change each year, Thad. Absolutely. By this time, this was a harder schedule as well. By the time next year, who knows what the world looks like? But right now, it's a dark, grim world. All right. Appreciate it, guys. Enjoy watching the games. Obviously, if you want to hit me up anytime, you can do so on the DM or whatever it's called here, the PM, or email me benstandingsports@gmail.com. Hit me up on Twitter. You know that. Other than that, cheers. Happy holidays, everyone. Let's go watch some football. I'll catch you guys later. See ya.